Hello and welcome to our discussion series on natural resource development. I'm Colin Craig and I'm pleased to be joined today by Tim Cameron. Tim is a project manager and he's been working in the oil and gas sector for over 20 years now. So we wanted to talk with Tim about what's happening in Drayton Valley because that's where he's been living and working for a long time now. So Tim, thanks for joining me today.
Great, thank you for the opportunity.
And for those who aren't familiar, Drayton Valley, it's about an hour and a half west of Edmonton. And Tim, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's certainly a lot of businesses and families and people that are connected in that area to oil and gas, the oil and gas industry, more so from what people refer to as the conventional side of the industry, which is when you're driving down the highway and you see those pumps kind of going up and down like this.
Pump tracks.
Yeah, is that basically what's happening there in terms of
That's right. So within kind of our region, I guess, as West Central, we are primarily conventional oil and gas. So it's conventional oil in the sense that they drill for the oil, they put a pump jack on it, drill for conventional gas, and the gas flows from the formation. It's not at all like what you would see in Fort McMurray with the heavy oil. Yeah, we're conventional light liquids and light oil.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks for giving us a quick 101 on Drayton Valley and its connection with the industry. I want to just start off by asking you, I think a lot of viewers are familiar. It's been very hard for Alberta in the past few years because of the price of oil has dropped. It's affected a lot of people. Government policies have piled on. What's been your own experience there in Drayton Valley?
Well, the experience has been that we saw the commodity prices fall. We saw the correction through 14 and 15. And then after that, when industry levels picked up in other jurisdictions across the planet, ours didn't. We would have intermittent stretches of activity, but they'd be very short-lived. So you go to maybe 30 or 40% of what we would consider to be a normal level, a normal work volume. And then it'd fall off and there'd be nothing for months and months and months. And it's just been very prolonged, and the town is, and the region is really, I don't want to say dying, but it's grasping. I mean, everybody is grasping on their last straw, their last string, their last dollar. I'm actually sitting in the parking lot of what was Ackland's Granger. I mean, Ackland's had been a business in Drayton Valley for decades. And there's paper on the windows, and there's just another example of another business closed. So ultimately, this has been a very protracted downturn, and while we see the rest of the world has moved on, we haven't. So it's been extremely frustrating.
So what has it meant for your own family, your own personal situation? Can you tell us about that? How has it affected you?
Well, it's really difficult because I'm in my 40s and I grew up in this area. I'm third generation in this area. We've all been in the energy industry in one way, shape, or form. And I was literally just having a conversation with a guy in the parking lot at a store in town about the fact that there's never been a shortage of work here. You could always find something to do if you wanted to work. And for the first time in my life, that's not the case. There's basically no jobs. The guy that I was speaking with had moved from PEI. He'd been here for 25 years. He'd be in his mid 50s, was not looking to retire, but getting himself set up for semi-retirement, bought himself a house back east 2 years ago. And he said to me now, he said, Tim, I'm fearful that I'm going to have to sell my retirement home off because I'm working so little. I'm working 30 days, 40 days, 50 days a year. Oh. He said there's no work, and it really struck me because I have those conversations with people daily. I have these conversations with people much more than I'd like to have. People who are not sure what or if they're going to have a retirement. People who are wanted to hand their businesses off to their families and can't now. They've sunk their retirement into their businesses because we've lived through the cycle so many times. We prepare for the cycle. This isn't the cycle anymore, and it hasn't been the cycle for several years. So I guess to circle back to your question about how does it affect me, it's hard. It's hard as a dad. It's hard to be that kind of the cornerstone of the family in the sense that I want to go to work and I want to provide for my family. And when it was very busy and I was working 350 days a year, I was doing it willingly. I was doing it because that was my choice, because that's the mentality to a certain extent of our industry, is that you make hay when the sun shines. It's an old farmer adage, but it's true for the energy industry. And those opportunities aren't there anymore. So there's a lot of issues in town now with mental health. I mean, I know people that are struggling with depression. I felt some of it myself, because you're not quite sure how to move on. It's almost become a scenario where you're thankful for every day of work, but you don't know what's after that day of work. Where we used to plan for seasons, we used to plan for years in advance. It's kind of days now. Well, we work. I was just telling the guy in the parking lot, I've worked 35 days in the energy industry as it were, excuse me, since November 4th of last year.
Wow.
That's no living. And I guess, am I hanging on? I am hanging on, but I'm struggling trying to reconcile how this has come to pass. How is it that the world wants energy? How is it that Canada wants energy delivered and consumed at a very high standard, and we produce it? And how is it that we aren't moving forward? It's a little bit like the Walking Dead, I guess, for lack of a better example. Just, we feel like kind of zombies in a sense. Just you're not sure what to do next. You're not sure how to move forward. You can't really sell anything that you have here. So what do you do? Well, I mean, and because I've got a family, we've got boys at home. We can't just pick up and move and then live off savings somewhere else and try and maintain this household as well if you can't sell it. So it's deeply frustrating and very upsetting.
Yeah, I can imagine how difficult it must be for people. It would be very hard, I think, for a lot of people to relate with only being able to work, like you said, 30, 40 days in, 7-month period or whatever it is. I mean, that's got to be very hard.
Well, it's hard. And then what I guess the exclamation point on this question that you asked was, I walked into the store and I saw a former business owner, someone that I'd spent a little bit of time with a couple years ago, stocking shelves. And no, without exaggeration, 2 aisles over is a lady that I know had sold real estate in Drayton for decades. So here we have two people in their late 50s, early 60s who were holding on.
Yeah.
They're the epitome of what I'm talking about. They're holding on, and this is just a downturn, and we'll come through this. And you get to the point where you go, I didn't understand that the downturn wasn't going to be a downturn based on commodity. It was going to be a downturn based on ideology. And now our way of life is being dramatically impacted. So if you haven't sold out, you have to do what you have to do. And unfortunately, some people have had to turn to stocking shelves. I mean, I don't know what the lady in real estate would have made a year, but real estate was very, very strong in West Central for many, many years.
Yeah.
Well, it tells the story that she's stocking shelves now, unfortunately.
I know I've seen the same thing in Calgary. I was in a chapters. This is probably a year and a half ago now. And one of the guys I was talking to on the floor that was helping me find a book, he was a geophysicist or geologist, something like that. I mean, it was, he could tell you had to go to school for a long time, and he would have been doing a lot better when the industry was doing well. And now he was having to, work in a completely different field where he would not be making the same type of income. I want to talk about the big picture in a second, but I just want to ask you a little bit more about sort of the community of Drayton Valley and what you're seeing. When we chatted on the phone before briefly, you had mentioned about a couple boys that were not going to school because they were trying to provide for their family and help the family pay the bills.
Right. So my middle son is in grade 11, and he had said that during the Christmas break that he happened to know two young boys, same age as him, that were going to be going back to school for the second semester because they were going out to try and find odd jobs so that they could help their parents pay the bills. I mean, what we see here that's partly what I mean about the Walking Dead scenario. It feels surreal because we have the energy industry is such an interesting community because it's so small, I guess, in a sense. You don't have to go very far. You don't have to talk to very many people. And people that are working in Australia. You know people that are working in Africa. We know people that are working in South America. We know people in the States that are working. And their industries are thriving, and they're thankful for them. And their things are all right. And it's not happening here. So that's exactly right. We see people taking steps that they shouldn't have to take to try and support their families, and it's just bizarre. Yeah, seeing kids not being able to go through school is just heartbreaking. And when we went through the commodity downturn in the mid '80s, I remember people saying, my parents specifically, that we're probably going to have to share our lunches with kids. It's going to come true. But that's a cycle that ends, and we come out the other side. And with no investment happening now in our industry, is there another side? Or do we turn this corner ever? It's hard to say at this point in
time. Yeah, that's incredibly difficult to hear when you hear that kids are not able to go to school, because education, of course, is so important. It must be hard for those parents too to see that their own kids are, having to skip class to, help family make ends meet.
Or the fact that my dad volunteers at the food bank in town, and food bank usage had gone to all-time highs in 2014 and 2015, and then fluctuated somewhat, and then just continued to climb. I mean, he would never give me any names, but he said, Tim, there's people coming through the food bank now that families that I know, and I don't think that by in a traditional sense, I don't know anybody that's suffering. I don't know anybody that I would consider to be poor. But when he tells me that there's families, plural, that I know that are accessing the food bank, you start to get a grasp of the sense we're very middle class, average Canadian, right? I mean, we've got a couple vehicles, and our home is we've got a nice home, and these are people just like me, post-secondary educated. There's a misnomer that we're uneducated in the energy industry, and that couldn't be further from the truth. We're extremely highly trained and educated, both from a safety standpoint and a technical standpoint. So our skills are in demand across the globe now. But these are people that have tried to stay here to keep their family life together as much as they can. And it's not working. They're having to look for other alternatives to try and feed their families, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's got to be hard to see, when your friends or family are struggling like that too. I want to ask you about, shift to the bigger picture now for a moment. Governments across this country, of all political strike, are talking about reducing carbon dioxide emissions. And obviously there's a very strong environmental movement and many mainstream Canadians that believe that we've got to reduce emissions. So what do you say to people that are saying, well, you know what, you're just going to have to transition to a new job. We've just got to keep Alberta's oil in the ground.
I think it's unfortunate the disconnect that's happened with people and their reality. It's not just the energy reality, it's the reality of what agriculture looks like. It's the reality of what forestry looks like, what the beef industry looks like. People are accessing information now, and they're being fed stories that aren't true about who we are, about the standards that we work under, and the fact that in every case, we are so heavily regulated. There are places across the planet that are 20 years behind us, 40, 50, 60 years behind us in terms of the technology that we work with. So should we always strive to do better? Yes. Should we strive to reduce emissions? Yes. That being said, we're the best on the face of the earth. We operate to standards that other countries can't even understand. I personally know people that are working in other countries that I've mentioned. I mean, they're Saudi Arabia, Algeria, for example, are countries where it's not uncommon to see them burn off an oil spill. That hasn't happened in Canada in my lifetime. Yeah. We are that far ahead, but people have been led down this path to think that we're evil. But here's the fact: you could stop all the production across Canada for the energy industry, and it's not going to make a dent in the world emissions. So should we be striving to do better? Yes. But all that means, folks, is that we need to keep pushing the bar higher. We've set the bar. We are the pinnacle. We can do better, and we will continue to do better. But pretending like we should shut off the taps here first is irresponsible. If anywhere, we should be shutting off the taps and stopping production here last, once the rest of the world has transitioned. And we can be part of that. We can transition off. But pretending it's going to happen tomorrow is just mind-boggling to me when you see the facts that energy consumption across the face of the earth is increasing.
Yeah.
The world needs more of our energy. That's the bottom line. We should cut off the worst offenders first and leave the best offender or the best producers, I guess I should say, my apologies for that, for last.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult conversation to have, and we really try and encourage people. I do personally. If you don't understand it, I've talked to our MPs, MLAs, senators. The conversation needs to change. And what you need to do is you need to come to a town like Drayton Valley. I've offered to tour all of those political individuals. Say, pick a direction. This is an unprompted tour. You pick a direction, north, south, east, or west from Drayton Valley, and I'll drive you at my own cost and show you operations. And it doesn't take long, and you start to understand what the truth about this industry is. The truth is that I have 2 pipelines crossing my land.
Mm-hmm.
I've raised a family. My wife has horses. We've never had an issue, not one issue. And we've been on this piece of land for 15 years. The concern about pipelines, the concern about what this industry is, and assuming that it's bad is it's just gotten out of control. And in fairness, the industry hasn't stood up for itself properly, and we're starting to see that a little bit. I hope it's not too late, but yeah, certainly people aren't understanding the truth about their industries in Canada.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. A lot of the facts haven't gotten out there, and people haven't had a chance to really reflect on what the true story is. I want to shift a little bit to talking about the government and its role in what's happening in Alberta, because as you mentioned, there was the downturn that happened globally. It affected the entire oil and gas industry around the globe, but a lot of other countries have recovered, and Canada still largely hasn't because of government policies really holding the industry back. We did our own report on that, but we know that the government's made it hard to get a pipeline built, to get approvals for different projects and so forth. So what's your own take on what you're hearing from people in your community about their thoughts about government policies sort of holding industry back and sort of keeping a community like yours in a very difficult situation?
What people don't understand is that it's been literally a death by 1,000 cuts. Sure, the story has been, or the story that has been preeminent is the fact that, well, there's a pipeline where the government of Canada, we as taxpayers bought a pipeline, even though it was fully funded, it didn't need to be purchased. Mm-hmm. They've bogged the process down and muddied the waters to a point where investment is going to places where ultimately it comes down to risk reward. And when you see companies choosing to operate in South America, in countries in Africa, where the risk is very high, it's volatile, it's corrupt, but it's somehow more palatable than operating here, that says a lot. So the community's immensely frustrated, unbelievably frustrated, because we continually it looks as though there's one hurdle left. So there's a hurdle, oh wait, then after the hurdle, there's a hurdle, and then there's another hurdle, and another hurdle, and it just won't end. And what happens is that spooks investors. If you can't come and have a stable return on your investment just flees. And we've seen that unimaginably. It's the last number I saw, I think there was 58 drilling rigs operational in Western Canada. This was about a week ago. Whereas normally that number would be somewhere, 300, 400, 500, depending on the year, depending on commodity prices. But we're operating at a fraction while other jurisdictions are flourishing. So and like I said, to lesser standards. So why does it end up having to be that way? It's because of policies, and the misnomer is that there's an effort to try and clean up policy and make it more understandable for industry. When basic energy producers can't get funding for basic credit facilities for their basic operations day to day, we're seeing that happen more and more now. Yeah. That's the sign. That's the real canary in the coal mine that people need to understand. Is that it's that death by 1,000 cuts, and the ultimate end result is the suffocation, I think, of the industry, and it's happening. It's absolutely happening, and it's not because they're getting out of the business and walking away. It's happening. They're continuing on in other jurisdictions across the planet.
Yeah, it's actually beyond the oil and gas industry. It's mining, it's forestry, it's affecting a lot of natural resource development, because the discussion's been taken over by, I think, a lot of people that are pursuing fairly radical objectives. I mean, we have to be rational about this whole discussion, and what you've said is bang on. demand for oil and gas and minerals and forestry products, it keeps going up and up and up.
Right.
So if we don't provide that, it's going to simply come from another country, a country where they probably, or they may not care about environmental standards the same way that Canada does. They may have terrible human rights track records and so forth. So,
and we know that they don't support charities. I mean, the companies here overwhelmingly supported charities and sporting teams. I mean, for example, my youngest son runs in the Bloomsday Run in Coeur d'Alene every year. And for the last few years, there hasn't been any corporate sponsorship. So on top of going through a downturn, we've got to come up with money to help fund the kids to go and do a basic run. Yeah. These are things that people don't see. There's a reason why there was the Pengrowth Saddle Dome. There's a reason why energy companies will go do these sorts of things to engage with the community. Is it a perfect industry? No, but there is no perfect industry. That's the end of the story. So it's extremely frustrating to see what's happening.
Yeah, I know it is, and it's hard to hear what you're going through. Obviously it's harder for you to go through it, but I do thank you for being willing to share a few thoughts today and let us know what you're seeing up in Drayton Valley, and keep our fingers crossed, and hopefully we pull through this soon. But I think it certainly helps for people like you to be able to help get some of the facts out there and get people thinking about what's happening and what fellow Canadians are going through. So thanks so much, Tim, for joining me.
One other thought, Colin, is if people get a chance, they should go check out the Canadian New Deal. It's a group of advocacy groups that are working together with ag, with beef, with forestry, and with energy towards sharing the positive message, letting folks know the truth about what's happening with our industries. We're all Canadian families, and we're all facing significant challenges. So it's a great positive way to get engaged and get some truth about what's happening, and just try to slow down the negativity train that we've been facing. So if people get a chance, that'd be great if they check that out. And I sure appreciate the time. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, and thank you. And what should they Google again? A Canadian New Deal?
Yeah, the Canadian New Deal. Absolutely. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, listen, I hope people will go off and Google Canadian Deal and think about what you've shared with us today, and let their friends know. So thanks again for joining me.
Excellent. Thank you.
Take care.